Take a look at this photo of the Arabian desert and you'll see that one of the most ambitious construction projects in history is on. A 200-metre wide trench runs from the Hijaz Mountains to the Gulf of Aqaba. Not only that, but take a look at this, the first portion of what will be the biggest set of foundations ever built. And now that concrete is set, the first vertical structures are about to emerge.
In other words, the thing that everyone said would never be built, could never be built, is actually being built. Or is it?
I believe he said we're going to start going vertical, hopefully, at the end of this year. Generally in real estate, hope is not a strategy.
Because for every sign of progress, there's
budget issues
grinding to a halt.
Saudi Arabia has asked consulting firms to conduct a strategic review of the line.
There are even rumours swirling that the whole thing has been cancelled. But what do we actually know?
2026 is going to be make or break for the line. This is the year when deadlines need to be met and when progress is going to be measured in height, not hype. Because regardless of what you think of this project,
is this idea even realistic?
That is absolutely insane.
There's a country whose future depends on it and a leader who staked his entire reputation on it.
They say it can be done. They can keep saying that and we can keep proving them wrong.
So will it ever be built? Let's find out.
So, in case you've been living under a rock, this is the line, Saudi Arabia's plan for a massive linear city. When, or if, it's complete, it'll form the capital of NEOM, a vast new region in the country's northwest, dreamed up by this guy, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. It forms part of his Vision 2030, an ambitious plan to wean the country off its oil dependency by, you guessed it, 2030.
Now, the numbers behind the line are staggering. It's going to be 200 metres wide by 500 metres tall, and it will run for 170 kilometres across the desert. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't even begin to get my head around something that big, so I'm not even trying. I'm building my own little Lego model of the line using little Lego bricks, only 2 bricks high. The model I'm building here is 0.003% the size of the actual line. And to give you a sense of that scale, this would be the Empire State Building. You can see the line would absolutely dwarf it in height, but just look how far it stretches. So the burning question that I and much of the rest of the world has is, how the hell do you build something like this?
Let's start with the basics. The line crosses lots of wildly varying terrain, hard mountain rock, soft open desert, and salty coastal plains. To build anything across such a varied landscape, you first need a uniform, stable footing.
And that's where the foundations come in. Say I want to build a skyscraper, but the ground I'm trying to build my skyscraper on is rubbish. Now, this beanbag is to represent something called quaternary deposits, which is basically a really fancy way of saying loosely deposited material that hasn't been compacted and is pretty terrible for putting any kind of weight through. This is what you're going to find under much of the site of the line. However, below that, down here, through all this material, is bedrock, and that's a great surface for putting a building on. How do I get down there? Well, I have to create something called a piled raft foundation, which looks a little bit like this. So I get a nice solid concrete slab on top here at ground level, and then the weight of my building gets carried down, transferred through all this terrible material here. There's no weight going on it. Instead, the weight's being pushed down through the piles, down here, into that solid bedrock. What I'm left with here is an absolutely outstanding surface for building a skyscraper on. Okay, that probably makes it sound pretty simple, but spoiler alert, it's most definitely not. Designing foundations for any building, let alone one of this size, takes a ton of calculation. And for that, you need some serious muscle, which is where the AMD Threadripper Pro 9000WX series of processors comes in. Now, with a name like Threadripper, it's no surprise that this is one of the go-to chips in the world of construction. Joking aside, the chip is a cornerstone of the architecture, engineering, and construction industries because it's built for intense multifunctional workflows. Threadripper Pro packs up to 96 cores, way more than a standard high-end desktop, and it combines that with a massive L3 cache, which gives it near instant access to huge datasets, perfect for simulation, rendering, and modeling. In other words, it's created for the people who design the building, those who construct the building, and the people who create those super slick renders that we all love drooling over. But we can't mention processing power in 2025 without talking about AI. Threadripper Pro includes built-in support for generative AI workloads, large language models, diffusion models, you name it. Whether you're developing AI tools or designing with them, this chip gives you the compute and memory headroom to keep up. But don't just take my word for it. Check out the Threadripper Pro 9000WX series at the link below. You'll be helping us out and upgrading to the industry's highest standards. Now, let's get back to those foundations.
The number of piles you need and the depth they go to varies massively depending on the size of what you're building and the soil underneath it. The Empire State Building has 55 piles dropping down 16 meters into the Manhattan bedrock. The Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, has 194 piles sunk 43 meters into the earth. But the work currently underway on the line dwarfs anything ever seen before. Phase 1 has seen over 16,000 piles driven up to 70 meters deep into the Saudi sand. That's nearly 1,000 kilometers of drilling using up to 3.5 million cubic meters of concrete. On top of that, an 8-meter thick raft will form the basis for everything else that this colossal project promises. To pull it off, an automated factory is churning out tens of thousands of 32-meter long rebar cages to reinforce each pile. Meanwhile, drilling rigs are using GPS to precisely bore the holes that these rebar cages are going to be dropped into. A biodegradable liquid is pumped into the holes to stop them from collapsing before concrete can then be poured in. But it's not just soft earth that engineers have to grapple with. Being so close to the sea, this stretch also needs protecting from the highly saline groundwater. Left untreated, it could rust the steel cages over time and corrode the concrete piles. Now, to solve this, the world's largest dewatering system has been created. 500 wells were drilled along this stretch of the line, each equipped with a water pump at its bottom. Water is pumped out at a rate of 90,000 cubic meters an hour, all towards a settlement pond where the quality of the liquid is checked. From there, the water is filtered and pumped out to sea in a series of discharge pipes. Work on the foundations for Phase 1 is nearly complete, which means the project is about to enter its next milestone, going vertical. On a typical skyscraper, that means building the core. If you ever walked past a construction site, you'll probably have seen these going up. They're not that attractive, but they're critical to how a skyscraper works. You see, it's essentially the backbone of the building, and it's formed by pouring concrete into a mould that gets pushed up by hydraulic jacks. But with the line, there's a twist.
And to explain that, I am once again resorting to Lego. So don't forget that the line is a city. It's a framework. It's not a single building. So it doesn't have one single core that stretches for 170 kilometers inside it. Instead, it's made up of thousands of cores, each built individually just like any other core. But crucially, these support the yellow decks you can see here, which are going to be the primary decks of the structure. They're like the main streets, the main avenues, and the cores are going to be the cross streets. It's just like the Manhattan grid, except imagine it folded up and stacked vertically. It's here within this framework where the city is going to really come to life. You'll find schools, hospitals, homes, transport infrastructure, everything you need to make a city function.
This is what's currently under construction, 2 rows of 500-meter towers. Phase 1 will see 4.8 million tons of steel outrigger beams hoisted up to support the 5 decks running through each.
Usually on skyscrapers, the steelwork and cladding will start to be added before you get to this stage. They basically follow the core up the building, which is why 2026 is so exciting, because things should really start to take shape and we should start to see some fast progress. That
is the $1 billion, $1 trillion question. Let's start by talking about concrete. Now, pouring concrete at scale is incredibly complex. Pour it too slowly and it'll set unevenly, but pour it too fast and the ingredients can split. Get the mixture too wet and your concrete's going to be brittle. Too dry and it'll end up like Swiss cheese. Basically, it relies on total consistency for long periods of time.
Now, millions of tons of concrete have already been poured, which is a pretty solid track record. But that's here, on the coast, with access to supply lines. This city still has a very long way to go, up into a vast hinterland with no access to local materials and a near total lack of one very key ingredient: water.
But there's a plan. It all begins here at the Octagon, another of NEOM's mega projects, where a massive desalination plant is going to pump billions of litres of seawater to reservoirs dotted along the length of the city. They'll feed a $190 million network of concrete factories capable of producing 20,000 cubic meters of concrete every day.
But there's a catch. As it stands, none of this currently exists. Work on Octagon only began in mid-2025. Those vast concrete plants are still a very long way off, and concrete's currently being produced locally with water shipped in by tankers, which is by no means a scalable solution.
In fact, yet again, there have recently been unconfirmed reports that the desalination plant has been quietly scrapped.
I'm not just splitting hairs here. The line has got some very ambitious targets to meet in less than 9 years' time. The NEOM Stadium is set to be suspended 350 metres up in the air inside the line and is set to host games at the 2034 FIFA World Cup, games that people are going to be buying tickets for. And to be honest, for that to be credible, by this stage I'd expect to see a lot more evidence of scalable activity. Instead, what it looks like as I stand here at the end of 2025 is a project that's trying to build something, anything, just to gain a bit of momentum and prove people wrong.
So, what are they actually building? What is this phase 1 we keep mentioning? Well, when you saw this, and this massive trench in the desert, what did you think was going to be built?
Maybe the whole thing, or maybe half, or at least a quarter. Well, no. Despite building that enormous 170 kilometre long cutting through the desert, they're actually only building this, phase 1, a mere 2.4 kilometres of the line. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still an absolutely massive building in its own right, but it accounts for less than 1.5% of the entire line structure. You might be feeling a little bit shortchanged by that, I know I certainly am, but there is a bit of strategy here. You see, the NEOM team are using phase 1 to construct some of this city's biggest and most spectacular anchor assets.
An anchor asset is something that, once it is completed, attracts investment and development around that area. A really great example would be the High Line in Manhattan, right? It was this elevated, sort of derelict, abandoned rail tracks, and it was revitalized and turned into a public park. And because of that project, now that area around the High Line has become one of the most expensive and coveted areas in Manhattan.
The whole structure is divided into 800-metre long modules. Think of these as being like the neighbourhoods or city blocks of the line. Phase 1 is going to see 3 of these built near the western end of the site, containing some of the city's most spectacular features. There's going to be a man-made marina capable of hosting the world's biggest cruise ships, the 46,000 capacity NEOM Stadium, and hanging below, a vast chandelier welcoming people into this giant structure.
What NEOM is trying to do here is basically say, we're going to fund and build a collection of anchor assets around which sort of the next phase will organically take place. That is the stated goal here.
Now, in many ways, that makes a lot of sense. It's a sophisticated strategy based on industry-wide standards. Where it doesn't make sense is that this is a 170-kilometre long city in the desert.
The line is supposed to be a revolutionary city that tears up the rulebook in the most audacious way possible and changes the way we think about our cities forever. For an ambitious leader with unchecked power, it's exactly the type of project you take on to capture the world's imagination. But for everyone else, it's a huge risk.
We like to say that development is a dollars and cents game, or in this case, a reals and halahas game, right? You have to be so maniacally focused on cost. However, here, this development is part construction project and part sort of symbol for what Saudi Arabia can become, right? And it goes all the way to the top. The Crown Prince, MBS, is the one that everyone ultimately answers to. So the question becomes, is he being told the truth? Is he being told exactly what he needs to know? Is there a leadership strong enough on NEOM to push back on, let's say, some of the prince's more fantastical visions? Because he may go in and say, oh, I actually want this to curve this way, or I want this to kind of jump over this thing. And each of those ideas in his head can turn into billions of dollars of cost overruns and months or even years of delays, right? And that doesn't really work well for large-scale development.
Ever since the line was announced, it's faced intense criticism around its alleged human cost.
Homes, schools, hospitals wiped off the map.
There have been allegations of using modern-day slavery on sites and orders to execute tribespeople who refuse to relocate. Allegations that NEOM and the Saudi Arabian government vehemently deny. Beyond that, it's been very difficult/impossible for us or any journalists to gain real access to the sites, though relationships with the press are of course approached very differently in Saudi Arabia.
But that wall of silence casts a shadow over the fundamentals of this project. We reached out to dozens of people involved in the line for this video, and almost nobody would talk to us for fear of reprisals. The hard truth is that as Saudi Arabia works to become a more progressive society, as it works to change its culture as part of that Vision 2030 plan, it's going to have to learn to master its relationship with the free press beyond its borders.
People who are asking questions about this project are running into that clash of cultures in a way. You want to understand why costs have tripled, or why this has been replaced, or why this has changed, or why there's been no updates on XYZ, but you're still dealing with a place that is used to not having to answer to anybody.
Now, if the line does get built, it won't be the first showpiece city constructed from scratch. This is Brasilia. Founded in 1960, it replaced Rio de Janeiro as Brazil's capital. Just like the line, it was built in what was perceived as a remote and inhospitable location. And even more like the line, the city's plan was like nothing anyone has seen before. It was designed in the 1950s, the jet age, when rapid advances in aviation and the jet set represented all that was cutting edge and futuristic. Brasilia was meant to represent a country reborn in the modern era, so it was designed like an aeroplane. Government buildings are housed in the cockpit, with housing laid out on the wings and a military district in the tail. The fuselage forms a monumental axis uniting the whole city. Just like Brasilia, the line is kind of an attempt to create a new, forward-looking symbol for a nation. But rather than looking to the skies, it takes inspiration from the pages of science fiction.
Out of the blue, I got an email from a Saudi Arabian woman, invited me to talk with her about giving input into the aesthetics of the line. And she made it clear that he was very interested in cyberpunk.
Chris Habels-Gray is an academic and author who's written extensively about cyberpunk and other topics.
The line itself seems to be based in part on something from Snow Crash, a novel where the virtual reality world was built around one long street, an almost infinite virtual street.
Even if you're not familiar with the term, you're going to have seen the cyberpunk aesthetic everywhere, from video games to TV shows and movies like Blade Runner. Chris was one of a handful of people asked to provide background research for what we now know as the line.
And I collected a lot of images and quotes from cyberpunk and related types of science fiction writing that I thought they might find useful. And so I was told to look especially at urban planning, the urban ideas of cyberpunk, but also the related so-called punk genres. I didn't get to see this, but several people were there. The prince did arrive at a scheduled demonstration or exhibition of a lot of these ideas, which they said was mainly just big images. So then he chose what he liked, and these was theoretically incorporated into the plans for building the whole city.
These are some of the images that Chris shared with NEOM. Looking at them, you can see the clear link with the concept images released in the early stages of the line. If there's one aspect of the line that does seem straight out of a video game, it's the distinctive mirror finish that covers every patch of the building's exterior. Now, reflective glass isn't anything new, but it does come with some disadvantages. The type used on buildings is made by transferring metal deposits onto glass through a highly charged gas, a process known as sputter coating. It's effective to produce at scale, but slightly translucent, and at best only reflects around 40% of light. In other words, it'll never be as good as this. This is Moriah. It's a remarkable building that was constructed in 2019 and is thought to have been a key inspiration for the line. At first, it was clad in polished metal sheets, but these quickly spoiled in the harsh, sandy environment. For a perfect mirror finish, you need a mirror. But mirrors are fragile. In the extreme heat of the desert, the lamination that binds them can fail, and the silver coating can peel away from its backing. To produce something that could withstand those conditions, an entirely new type of mirror was developed. Normally, you'd make a mirror from standard glass. Large sheets are produced, cut to size, and then coated with a silver finish. But to survive the extreme temperatures, this glass would also have to be heat-treated or tempered. The mirror coating could only be applied after tempering, but tempered glass can't be cut. So to produce the mirrors from Moriah, the entire production line had to be reversed. The raw glass was first sent to be precisely cut to its final size, and was then heat-treated before being returned to its initial factory for the new mirror coating. Along with a silver spray, the mirrors were coated with copper to provide resistance against intense solar radiation. The result is what you see today, a surface with over 90% reflection that can withstand some of the harshest conditions on Earth.
Talking of the harshest conditions on Earth, here's a big one. The line will not be air-conditioned.
That's right. The lack of outdoor cooling was confirmed in a presentation by the line's Chief Development Officer earlier this year. You've got to remember that this isn't a building, it's a city. So inside your home or your office or wherever, you can have as much aircon as you want. But out on the streets, you're subject to the ambient temperature of the desert. And if that's not bad enough, it can be made worse by the heat island effect, a phenomenon where cities absorb and retain heat much more dramatically than rural areas. In hot weather, for example, London can be up to 5 degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside because of all its heat-absorbing concrete. And in the line, there's going to be a lot of concrete, and steel, and glass. Now, that's pretty major, but currently all we have to go on is an assurance that this has all been thought about and modelled and that it's all going to be okay. One argument made is that the mirror finish of the line's walls is going to reflect so much light that the city won't actually absorb that much heat. We're also told the glass is going to be breathable to allow air to pass through. Now, whether that means the vast walls will have vents in them or there's a brand new material being invented, we just don't know. But it doesn't exactly fill you with optimism. So it looks like life in the line is going to be largely lived within modules. Each one is being designed to contain all the basic amenities that you need, accessible within a short walk. Essentially, it's an extension of the 15-minute city concept that you see in places like Copenhagen or Zurich.
But for that to be possible, you've got to be able to get around without melting.
And if you need to go any further, you'll need some form of transportation. But before we can get stuck into how transport will work, we need to explain why the line is a line. So apparently, we've all been doing our cities wrong. This is London, home to about 8.6 million people, just shy of the 9 million people that could ultimately live in the fully realised line. It swallows up a sizable chunk of the southeast of England. Now, look what happens if we compare that to the line. The point they're making is that this represents the old way of building cities. It's grown without any real plan, it's sprawling, and it's inefficient. Wouldn't it be much neater if we could take all those people and house them in this slick, technologically advanced structure? And to do that, there's one key thing you need to get rid of: cars. Now, cars may be a large part of why Saudi Arabia is rich, but this is looking to the future. Cars take up a lot of space, they crash, they've got to be parked, they don't carry many people.
What the line's promising is something much better.
Here at the bottom, you'll find the line's high-speed railway. It's going to connect the international airport to the western tip. Supposedly, it's going to take 20 minutes to make that whole journey, which would be faster than any train in existence today. Above all this, the line's general mass transit, a suburban-style rail system, will be stopping every 1.5 kilometres. Then, distributed between the line's 5 primary decks, will be a light rail network stopping every 100 metres. Connecting people between the levels will be a series of escalators and lifts. Now, this is supposed to be one of the big selling points of the line, that its shape is a better, more efficient concept for a city, but is that really the case? Well, to answer that, take a look at this. This is Apple Park, Steve Jobs' last great creation. It's similar to the line in that it has this simple structure that houses everything, but it's different because it's a circle. That was deliberate because a circle embodies certain ideas. For one, in a circle there's no hierarchy, no top or bottom, no coveted corner offices, and the space inside is equally shared by all. It's also good for getting around, no pun intended. The furthest anyone has to travel is a straight line from one side to another. The maximum distance you have to travel is the diameter of the building.
Now we'll take a look at the line. If I want to travel anywhere, I've only really got 2 options, head left or head right. Whereas in a radial city, I've got every direction to turn in, so the average journey will always be shorter. Now let's take a look again at those transport options. We're being told that we're going to be able to get from here all the way down to the other end of the line, 170 kilometers away, in just 20 minutes.
This is the China Railway CR45OAF. It's the fastest train in the world, although it's still currently in development. It'll have a top speed of 450 kilometers an hour, meaning that not even this could travel the line in 20 minutes, and that's without allowing any time for speeding up or slowing down.
Plus, it'll only have 2 stations, meaning it's not much use for people that live in the middle of the city. It means that for those other services, you're stuck using a suburban train that stops every 1.5 kilometers or roughly every mile. How efficient is that?
So where are we? We started this video by saying the line and the wider project NEOM were part of Vision 2030, a plan to kind of totally rewire the Saudi economy by the end of the decade and save the country from economic ruin. Well, that clock is ticking, and we don't even know if Phase 1 is going to be complete by then. Just a few months ago, a detailed investigation by the Financial Times claimed that top-level executives were privately admitting that this project was impossible, and that's really the crux of the whole scheme.
When it was announced in 2021, the line was so bold in its ambition. It made headlines around the world. It forced everyone to debate what our cities should look like. It inspired kids and got them excited and engaged about the story of our future. It was so out there that it was almost confrontational. It dared people to write it off. And then with every drone shot showing progress, with every satellite image, they were presented like victory laps over those who had little faith. But we're 5 years in now, and this thing really needs to start showing some progress. 2026 is being touted as a big year, as the year where things are really going to start to take shape. But if that doesn't happen, then all bets are off. It's tempting to think that, well, if anyone could build something like this, it's going to be Saudi Arabia with its unchecked power and its vast resources. But as we've seen, it's not just up to them anymore.
Ultimately, it all boils down to money, and the purse here is controlled by one of the richest men on the planet. However, at this point, to fully realize what MBS wants, it's going to take more money than that purse has, right? So it's going to take a lot of buy-in from the private markets, external capital partners, foreign investors, etc. But generally speaking, they want to see a little bit more in terms of realistic assumptions.
Even if it does get built, there's still the question of livability. Will this be a functioning city? Will it be a place people want to live, or will they just visit?
What would you see in 10 years' time? So there's a very tiny chance, 10% maybe, that there'll be some facilities and a hunk of the line, and rich people will go there to marvel at it, and there will still be promises being made about further construction. And further resorts and more refuges might be built. I think more likely most of it will be abandoned.
There's no question that if this thing gets built, then it'll be one of the greatest things ever built in human history, the modern day equivalent of the pyramids. But that's a very big if. This project has its roots in cyberpunk, and the next year is going to be decisive in determining whether it stays as just science fiction or becomes science fact. This video was sponsored by AMD. Don't forget, you can do yourself a favour by clicking that link below and checking out the full Threadripper Pro lineup. And as always guys, if you enjoyed this video and you want to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, make sure you're subscribed to the B1M.